It was a quiet Monday morning in Fairview, Texas. The kind of morning where the world feels almost too normal. The sun warm but soft, the air still, the neighborhood half asleep. Inside a small duplex on Holt Street, Monique Carter shuffled toward the front door in her robe and slippers. She wasn't expecting company. The knock was firm, steady, almost official. She pulled it open and froze. Standing there were two plainclothes detectives, and between them, Daniel Carter, alive, awake, looking straight into her eyes. 3 days earlier, she had stood in a morgue under dim, clinical lighting, staring at his pale, motionless face. She had nodded with calm certainty and told the technician, "That's my husband." She had believed, or at least pretended to believe, that he was gone forever. And now here he was, breathing, staring, silent. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The hum of morning traffic faded. Even the sunlight pouring through the doorway felt strange, like it didn't belong here. Monique's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the threshold, gasping, her hands clumsy against the cold floor. One detective steadied her. The other's voice was flat and precise. "Monique Carter, you are under arrest for solicitation of capital murder, attempted insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." It should have been the end of the story, a shocking arrest in a quiet Texas neighborhood. But the truth was far stranger and far darker. Because Daniel wasn't supposed to be alive. For weeks, Monique had been playing a dangerous game. Behind closed doors, she'd been crafting a plan to turn her husband's death into a $750,000 payday. She thought she had found the perfect partner in a local food delivery driver. She thought no one would ever connect the dots between an oil rig accident and the woman quietly cashing the insurance check. What she didn't know was that her accomplice had already gone to the police. What she didn't know was that every word, every move, every whispered plan was being recorded. And what she could never have imagined was that her own husband would agree to help set the trap. The knock at her door was not chance. It was the final move in a carefully orchestrated sting, a performance designed to show exactly how far she was willing to go. And it had all begun months earlier, with a marriage stretched thin, a lonely housewife, and a stranger who kept showing up at her door. Before the front door confrontation, before the morgue, the vial, and the whispers about life insurance, there was just Daniel and Monique Carter. They had been together since high school, two young kids in Fairview, Texas, who believed love alone could carry them through anything. By the time they were 20, they were married. At 25, they were parents to a baby boy named Caleb. It should have been the start of a simple, happy life. But simple and happy don't always survive the weight of reality. Daniel was a hard worker, and when a position opened up at Westfield Energy's oil drilling site in Rockford, he took it. The job promised good pay, benefits, and a future for his family. The cost? Time. Lots of it. His schedule was brutal. 2 weeks on the rig, 1 week off. 2 weeks of 12-hour days under the West Texas sun, sleeping in a cramped trailer hundreds of miles from home. And every time he packed his bag, Monique and Caleb stayed behind in Fairview. Daniel told himself it was temporary. A stepping stone. A sacrifice worth making for a better tomorrow. He would video call Monique at night after his shift, ask about Caleb's day, and check in about bills, groceries, and house repairs. But what started as warm conversations slowly cooled. Monique, now 25, didn't work outside the home. She didn't drive. Most days, her world shrank to the walls of their small one-story duplex. Neighbors described her as polite but distant, rarely leaving the house except to bring Caleb outside for a few minutes of fresh air. At first, she said she didn't mind. But over time, the isolation set in like a fog. The days blurred together, the same walls, the same routines, the same lonely evenings. Daniel's calls became predictable, his voice strained from exhaustion. And when he came home for that single week each month, it often felt like they were strangers learning each other's rhythms all over again. Neither of them said it out loud, but the marriage was changing. The easy affection of their teenage years was giving way to short tempers and silences. Daniel thought it was just the distance. "Once we save enough, I'll find something closer to home," he promised. But Monique was already looking for something else, something closer, something that made her feel alive again. She found it in the most ordinary place, the doorstep. It started with takeout, just a way to break the monotony. A burger here, some tacos there. And then one driver began showing up more than the others. His name was Tyrone Briggs, 28 years old, friendly, easygoing. At first, it was just a polite hello, maybe a short comment about the weather or traffic. But those quick exchanges turned into longer conversations. She'd linger at the door while Caleb napped, asking about his day, his other deliveries. Tyrone had no idea about the tension in the Carter marriage, not yet. For Monique, the attention felt new, different. He listened when she talked, laughed at her jokes. And when Daniel was hundreds of miles away, the sound of that laugh felt like a lifeline. By the time Daniel returned for his next week off, Monique's routine had already shifted. She looked at her phone more often. She smiled to herself at odd moments. And when Daniel noticed and asked why, she brushed it off. It would be months before he learned that while he was sweating under the Rockford sun, his wife was opening a different kind of door back home, one that would lead them both into a nightmare. At first, Tyrone Briggs was just another delivery driver in Fairview's east side. He knew the streets, the regular customers, the spots where tips were good, and the porches where no one ever answered the bell. Monique Carter's duplex wasn't anything special, a narrow walkway, a modest front door, the hum of an old AC unit in the window. But over the summer of 2021, it became a frequent stop on his route. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the app's algorithm. Either way, her orders started coming in several times a week, sometimes twice in a single day. The first few encounters were forgettable. A quick knock, a polite smile, the exchange of food for cash, or a tip on the app. Tyrone would wave, Monique would close the door, and that was it. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. One afternoon, she lingered at the doorway. Caleb was napping, the house was quiet, and for once, she wasn't in a rush. They talked, nothing deep, just casual chatter about the heat, traffic, and how delivery work had picked up since lockdowns. Tyrone had an easy way of speaking, relaxed and open, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. By the third month, the conversations had grown warmer, flirtatious. She complimented his smile. He teased her about ordering too many tacos. She began stepping outside to talk instead of staying behind the screen door. Then, one late afternoon in the fourth month, she invited him in. It was supposed to be just for a minute, a glass of water, a quick sit-down while he waited for his next order. But minutes turned into an hour, and the conversation into something else entirely. By the time Tyrone left, they both knew the line had been crossed. By the sixth month, it was no longer about food orders. Tyrone's visits had their own rhythm, always when Daniel was on rotation in Rockford, always during Caleb's nap. The relationship turned physical. To Tyrone, it felt casual at first, a distraction, something unplanned that just happened. He later told investigators that Monique often spoke about feeling invisible in her marriage, about the loneliness of days that never changed. He didn't see her as dangerous, just unhappy. But as summer wore on, Monique's tone began to change. She started bringing up her marriage more often, not just the loneliness, but resentment. She talked about wanting a different life, about moving away from Fairview entirely. Tyrone would nod, half listening, not realizing she was beginning to test the waters for something much darker. Then came the first mention of Daniel's life insurance policy. She spoke of it casually at first, as though she'd just remembered it. A $750,000 policy through his job at Westfield Energy. She was the sole beneficiary. And, she said with a strange calm, if he died on the rig, the payout would be almost immediate. She laughed about how dangerous oil rigs could be, how accidents were just part of the job. Tyrone chuckled along, thinking it was gallows humor. But then, she said it again the next week, and the week after, and each time, it sounded less like a joke. By late August, she was no longer laughing. She began asking pointed questions. What if he just didn't come home? The first time, Tyrone brushed it off. But the second time, she slowed her words, locking eyes with him, making sure he understood. And when she slid a small glass vial across her kitchen table one afternoon, her voice was almost casual. He takes a thermos to work every day. Same one, same time. That was the moment Tyrone realized this was no longer harmless flirtation, and that Monique Carter was thinking about more than just escaping her marriage. The moment Monique Carter slid that small glass vial across the table, something in the air changed. The playful energy that had defined her earlier conversations with Tyrone Briggs was gone. In its place was a cold, deliberate tone, the kind that made his stomach tighten. He stared at the vial. "What is this?" he asked. Monique didn't give a straight answer. "It's clean," she said softly. "Leaves no trace." She tapped it with her fingernail. It would just slow his heart down. Out there on the rig, they'd think it was natural. Another accident. Happens all the time. Tyrone sat back, uneasy. He thought she was exaggerating, that maybe she'd read something online and was spinning a fantasy she'd never act on. But she kept talking, and the more she talked, the more it became clear she had thought this through. She told him about Daniel's $750,000 life insurance policy, exactly how much, exactly who the beneficiary was, exactly how quickly it would pay out if his death was accidental and work-related. She explained that oil rigs were dangerous, that fatal mishaps were rarely questioned, and that the company's insurance process could be fast-tracked if the cause looked like a medical issue or routine hazard. She even printed documents from the insurance company's website and showed them to him. Payout timelines, claim forms, step-by-step instructions. "This isn't about violence," she insisted. "No one needs to know. It'll just happen. And when it's over, we can leave. Start fresh." Monique's fresh start had a destination, Bay Ridge, Texas. She painted the picture in vivid colors, the two of them moving into a new apartment, starting a mobile food business, raising Caleb somewhere far from the quiet, suffocating streets of Fairview. At first, Tyrone stayed quiet, letting her speak. But she didn't stop. Her words grew bolder, more specific. She talked about how Daniel always left for the rig early in the morning, carrying his thermos of coffee. She described exactly where it sat on the counter, how he never changed the routine. If someone slipped something in, she said one day, no one would ever know. Tyrone tried to laugh it off, to change the subject. But Monique didn't break eye contact. She leaned forward, voice low. "What if he just didn't come home?" she repeated. This time, it wasn't a question, it was a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, she brought it up again and again. She referenced how easy it would be, how they wouldn't have to wait long for the payout, how fast they could be gone. She'd drop lines like, "Once the check clears, we're out of here," as if the decision had already been made. The vial sat in Tyrone's mind like a splinter. He never saw what was inside, but her confidence in it was unsettling. She claimed it was medically clean, that it would mimic a heart issue without raising suspicion during an autopsy. When she spoke about Daniel's death, she didn't do it with rage or grief. She did it with practicality, the way someone might plan a renovation or a vacation. She listed tasks: fill the thermos, act surprised, make the call, file the claim. And she was ready to act. One late August afternoon, Monique looked him straight in the eyes and said, "He's back on rotation next week. That's when we do it." For Tyrone, that was the breaking point. This wasn't fantasy. This wasn't venting. She was setting a date. He left her house that day with the vial still in his mind and her words ringing in his ears. And as much as part of him wanted to pretend it wasn't real, another part knew he had to make a choice. Because if he stayed silent, the next time Daniel Carter left for the rig, he might never come home. Tyrone Briggs left Monique Carter's duplex that day with his chest tight and his mind racing. The glass vial she'd slid across the table still seemed to gleam in his memory, even though it was buried somewhere in her kitchen drawer. Her words, "That's when we do it," wouldn't stop echoing. For months, their relationship had been messy but simple, a lonely housewife, a delivery driver who stopped staying at the door. But now it was something else, something dangerous, and Tyrone knew it. That night, he sat in his car outside his apartment for nearly an hour, staring at his phone. He thought about deleting her number, blocking her, walking away. But if he did that, who would stop her? What if she found someone else willing to help? In the end, Tyrone made a call, not to Monique, but to the Fairview Police Department's non-emergency line. His voice was steady but low as he asked to speak to someone in investigations. He didn't want to give every detail over the phone. He just knew he had to tell someone before it was too late. The next morning, he was referred to the Special Investigations Unit. 2 detectives met him in a quiet office tucked behind the main station. Tyrone didn't sugarcoat it. He laid it all out. The affair, the conversations, the life insurance talk, the vial. He even handed over his phone, giving them full access to his messages with Monique. The texts weren't as explicit as her in-person comments, but they painted a clear picture, enough to convince the detectives that this wasn't just pillow talk. They decided on the spot. This was an active solicitation for murder, and they were going to catch her in the act. Tyrone was nervous, but when the detectives asked if he'd be willing to keep seeing Monique under their supervision, he agreed. They fitted him with a small audio recorder, barely noticeable under his shirt. Every meeting from now on would be documented. Every word she said would be captured. The plan wasn't just to gather more evidence. It was to build an airtight case, one that would leave no room for her to claim she was just joking or venting. Over the next week, Tyrone continued to visit Monique. He acted like nothing had changed, nodding along when she brought up Daniel's work schedule, the thermos, the payout. The detectives listened in from unmarked cars parked down the street, recording every word. But there was a bigger question. What about Daniel Carter? He had no idea any of this was happening. And if Monique went through with her plan without law enforcement warning him, the consequences could be fatal. So on September 5th, the detectives made their move. They contacted Westfield Energy, Daniel's employer, and requested a private off-site meeting under the guise of an unrelated identity verification matter. Daniel showed up wearing his work boots and Westfield cap, expecting a quick signature or a safety form. Instead, he found two detectives sitting across from him with serious eyes and a file on the table. They didn't drag it out. They told him, straight, there was an ongoing criminal investigation. His wife was involved. She was having an affair, and she had been trying to arrange his death for the insurance money. Daniel didn't yell, didn't pound the table. He sat back in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the folder. After a long pause, he asked just one question. Who is he? The detectives exchanged a glance. They told him they couldn't reveal Tyrone's identity, not yet. Instead, they shifted the conversation to the plan they wanted to propose. It was risky. It was unusual. But it might be the only way to prove Monique's intent beyond any doubt. They wanted to fake his death. Daniel leaned forward. Let her see my face, he said. I want to know how far she'll go. It was settled. Over the next 72 hours, the Special Investigations Unit, medical personnel, and the Milford County Medical Examiner's Office would coordinate a sting operation like no other. A harmless saline mixture would replace whatever Monique believed she was giving Tyrone. Daniel's death would be staged with precision, complete with a morgue viewing. If all went according to plan, they'd catch her red-handed, not just talking about murder, but acting on it. And Monique Carter wouldn't suspect a thing. When Daniel Carter left that meeting with the detectives, the Texas sun felt harsher than usual. Not because of the heat, but because he was now carrying a truth that could crush a man from the inside out. His wife, the woman he had loved since high school, was plotting to erase him from existence. And not in a moment of rage, but with calm calculation. For money. The drive back to the rig site was quiet. His hands gripped the wheel until his knuckles ached. Every mile marker felt surreal. The routine thoughts, fuel levels, work orders, the weather, were gone. In their place, a gnawing question. How long had she been planning this? By the time he pulled into his crew quarters, Daniel had made up his mind. If the police needed him to play dead, he'd do it. Not just to protect himself, but to see, with his own eyes, how far Monique was willing to go. The plan was complex, almost surgical in its precision. First, Tyrone Briggs would deliver the vial to Monique, under police supervision, telling her it contained the solution she'd been asking for. In reality, it would be nothing more than a harmless saline mixture. The detectives wanted her to believe it was the real thing, to take possession of it, and to act. Second, on the designated morning, Monique would prepare Daniel's thermos as she always did. Daniel would leave the house as if heading to Rockford for his shift, but instead, he'd meet an undercover unit at a secure location outside Fairview. From there, medical staff contracted by the Special Investigations Unit would take over. The sedation protocol was carefully chosen, fast-acting, safe, and reversible within hours, but convincing enough to mimic death. His breathing would slow, his heart rate would drop, and his skin would pale under the effects. He'd remain unconscious for no more than 4 hours. Finally, the Milford County Medical Examiner's Office would set the stage for the performance's climax, a morgue viewing. Under dim light, Daniel would be laid out on a stainless steel table, eyes closed, sheet pulled to the chest. No makeup, no theatricality, just the stark, sterile stillness of a man who appeared gone. When the detectives explained the last step, Daniel didn't flinch. He only said, "Make sure she has to look at me." In the days leading up to the operation, Daniel went about his life in Fairview like nothing had changed. He spent time with Caleb, mowed the small patch of grass outside the duplex, made small talk with neighbors. Monique never suspected a thing. If she noticed anything different, it was only that he seemed quieter than usual. She mistook it for exhaustion from the rig. Behind the scenes, every detail was locked in. Surveillance teams had their positions. Audio and video equipment was tested. The hospital-grade sedative was secured. Even Daniel's employer was looped in, ready to place the call that would shatter Monique's morning. On the evening before the sting, Daniel lay awake in a secure hotel room provided by the task force. He stared at the ceiling, replaying every year of his marriage in his mind. The laughter, the arguments, the promises, the night they'd brought Caleb home from the hospital. Now, all of it was leading to a moment where he'd watch the mother of his child stand over his body and decide, without hesitation, that she was ready to live in a world without him. He turned off the bedside lamp, his jaw set. Tomorrow would be the day Monique showed her hand, and Daniel Carter would be ready. The morning of September 10th began like any other rotation day for Daniel Carter. At least, that's what Monique thought. At 6:15 a.m., he came into the kitchen wearing his work boots and faded Westfield Energy jacket. The smell of coffee drifted through the small duplex. On the counter, Monique was already preparing his thermos, just as she had hundreds of times before. But this time, the detectives were already in play. Across town, Tyrone Briggs had delivered the harmless saline vial the day before, under police supervision. He told Monique exactly what she wanted to hear, that it would work quickly, quietly, leaving no trace. Surveillance teams recorded her taking it, nodding, and slipping it into a kitchen drawer. Now, as Daniel leaned against the counter, Monique filled the thermos, her hands steady. She didn't hesitate. No glances over her shoulder. No nervous tapping. She poured, capped it, and handed it to him with the same casual rhythm as every other workday. Then she kissed him lightly on the cheek and said, "Be careful out there." Daniel gave a small nod and walked out the front door. What she didn't know was that instead of heading to Rockford, Daniel drove a short distance to a predetermined meeting point, a quiet parking lot on the edge of town. Waiting there was an unmarked police SUV, its engine idling. He stepped inside, handing over his phone and keys without a word. The vehicle pulled away, merging into morning traffic like any other commuter car. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a secure medical facility outside Milford County. The air inside smelled faintly of antiseptic. A small team of contracted medical professionals was waiting, ready to begin the sedation protocol. Daniel didn't flinch as they inserted the foreline. The sedative entered his system quickly, a cool rush through his arm. Within minutes, his breathing slowed, his eyelids fluttered, and his body sank into stillness. Monitors tracked every vital sign. The team worked in quiet efficiency, adjusting lighting, draping him in his work clothes, ensuring that when the time came, he would look convincingly lifeless. At 2:03 p.m., the next phase began. From a controlled law enforcement line, an officer posing as a Westfield Energy HR representative called Monique. His voice was calm but urgent. "Mrs. Carter, your husband collapsed at work. Paramedics were unable to resuscitate him." He explained that his remains had been transferred to the Milford County Medical Examiner's office for verification. On the recording, Monique's response came quickly, a gasp, followed by what sounded like sobbing. She asked the caller to repeat himself, to confirm he was sure. Her voice cracked in all the right places. To an untrained ear, it sounded like grief. She was told to come in for a formal identification. That evening, she walked into the morgue alone. The corridors were cold and quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights echoing off sterile tile. A plainclothes officer, playing the role of morgue technician, led her to the viewing room. Inside, the light was dim but sufficient. Daniel lay on a stainless steel table, dressed in his work gear. The sheet covered him from the chest down. His skin had taken on the pale tone caused by the sedative. His lips slightly parted, his eyes closed. His breathing was imperceptible. Monique stood over him for 30 seconds. Not a flicker of doubt crossed her face. "That's my husband," she said finally, her voice even. She didn't cry. She didn't touch him. She simply confirmed the ID, turned, and followed the technician out. Behind a one-way glass, detectives exchanged grim looks. The operation had worked. She believed he was gone. Daniel remained under sedation for another 2 hours before the medical team began to reverse the effects. By nightfall, he was fully conscious, debriefed, and placed under protective watch. Monique, on the other hand, went home to a quiet house, already thinking about what came next. The very next morning, September 11th, the performance began. At 8:42 a.m., Monique Carter posted a black-and-white photo on her social media page. It showed Daniel holding their son Eli, the boy smiling in his father's arms. The caption read, "My world is gone." Within minutes, condolences began to pour in. Friends, neighbors, and distant relatives all left their hearts and prayers in the comments. Monique replied to many, each time with the same sorrowful tone. She accepted meal donations through a local support app. She updated her profile with new contact details, in case anyone wanted to help. But behind the screen, detectives were watching every keystroke. They saw each message, each calculated reply. By 11:26 a.m., Monique picked up her phone again, but this time, not for sympathy. She called the Westfield Energy HR department directly. The call was routed to an employee who had been fully briefed on the operation. Her voice was calm, businesslike. "I'm calling to ask about the next steps. Where do I send the documents for his life insurance claim?" She was given instructions, and without hesitation, she downloaded the forms from the company's internal portal. At 2 p.m., she printed them at a local copy shop. The surveillance team didn't stop her. They let her move, let her commit, every action tightening the noose of evidence. That evening, she sent a text message to Tyrone Briggs. "It's done. Thank you." The words were simple, final, like she was crossing something off a list. Tyrone, still under police supervision, didn't reply. He'd been instructed to go silent, to let her hang herself with her own words. 2 days later, September 13th, 9:05 a.m., Monique was getting ready to leave for an appointment with a notary. In her tote bag were the partially filled insurance claim forms, already bearing her handwriting. She planned to have them notarized, signed, and ready to submit. But before she could step outside, there was a knock at the door. She opened it wearing a robe and slippers. Standing in front of her were two plainclothes detectives, and between them, alive, alert, and silent, was Daniel Carter. Witnesses later said she froze for 2 or 3 seconds, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide. And then, she collapsed to her knees on the doorstep. One detective steadied her arm. The other's voice was firm and unmistakable. "Monique Carter, you are under arrest for solicitation of capital murder, attempted insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." There was no screaming, no pleading. She said nothing as they cuffed her wrists. Her face was pale, her lips tight, her eyes fixed on the ground. Inside, officers executed a search warrant, one they'd had ready for days. From the bathroom drawer, they recovered the empty glass vial Tyrone had delivered. On the dining table, they found the printed life insurance forms, partially filled in. On a side counter, a handwritten work schedule with Daniel's rotations, arrival times, and return dates. In a folder were notes outlining projected expenses for a mobile food business in Houston, the life she had imagined without Daniel. And then there was her phone. Texts, browser searches, voice recordings, all tying her to the plot. One voice note played her own words, chilling in their cold precision. "He drinks it fast. Just make it clean." Another, "It clears in 12, right? That's what you said." She didn't know it yet, but every single piece of evidence they needed was already in that house, and every single piece was about to be used against her. That morning, Daniel didn't speak to her. He didn't have to. His presence at that door, alive, said more than any words could. The trial of Monique Carter would become one of the most talked about cases in Travis County history, not because of the charges alone, but because of the way it all unfolded. From the very first day in court, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters lined the hallway outside the courtroom. Spectators filled every available seat. The air felt heavy, tense, as if the entire room was holding its breath. Monique entered in a standard county-issued jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare of makeup. She scanned the courtroom, but avoided Daniel's eyes. She entered a plea of not guilty. Her defense team, a public defender assisted by one private consultant, wasted no time framing their argument. They painted her as a young mother under crushing emotional strain, claiming postpartum depression had clouded her judgment. They suggested she'd been manipulated by Tyrone Briggs, that her words were nothing more than fantasy talk in a toxic affair. But the prosecution, they were armed to the teeth with evidence. For 2 weeks, they laid it all out. Every text message, every voice note, every printed insurance form. The jury watched video from the morgue, Monique standing over what she believed was her husband's lifeless body, nodding and saying calmly, "That's my husband." The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the courtroom's air vents. They heard audio recordings from the undercover operation. Monique's voice was clear, deliberate. "He drinks it fast. Just make it clean. It clears in 12, right?" They saw screenshots from her phone, life insurance documents, relocation searches in Houston, financial projections for a mobile food truck business. They saw the empty vial recovered from her bathroom drawer, identical to the one Tyrone had handed her under police supervision. And then, Tyrone Briggs took the stand. He spoke slowly, his hands clasped in front of him. "I thought we were just messing around," he said. But then she started planning things like she'd done it before. He described the day she pushed the vial toward him across the table, the way she thanked him when he agreed to pass it on, how she told him it would look like an accident. His voice wavered when the prosecutor asked, "If you hadn't gone to the police, do you believe she would have gone through with it?" "Yes," Tyrone said. "No doubt in my mind." Finally, it was Daniel Carter's turn. When he stepped into the witness box, you could feel the shift in the room. He wasn't there for drama. He wasn't there to yell or cry. He was there for the truth. The prosecutor asked him to describe the moment he learned of the plot. Daniel's gaze was steady. "It wasn't about the money," he said. "She wanted a future where I didn't exist." He recounted agreeing to the staged death, the sedation, the morgue, the plan to see just how far Monique would go. His testimony was brief, but it landed like a hammer. The jurors never took their eyes off him. A digital forensics expert followed, showing the spreadsheet recovered from Monique's laptop, titled PostDaniel.xlsx. Inside, projected apartment rentals, childcare costs, business startup expenses. It was, the expert said, a post-death budget. The defense tried to spin it as hypothetical planning, a mental escape from an unhappy marriage. But the prosecution's final argument cut through that like glass. This wasn't desperation, the lead prosecutor told the jury, her voice steady. This was design. She didn't break down. She made a decision. She set a plan in motion to remove her husband from this earth and collect a payday for doing it. On October 25, 2021, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts: attempted capital murder, solicitation of murder, attempted insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit a felony. The judge's voice carried no hesitation as he read the sentence. 35 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. No possibility of parole for the first 25 years. A no-contact order with her son for the duration of her incarceration. Daniel wasn't in the room for sentencing. He'd already said everything he needed to say. The trial was over. The marriage was over. And for Monique Carter, freedom was over. When the courtroom doors finally closed on Monique Carter's fate, it was as if the entire storm had passed. But for Daniel Carter, the damage was still scattered everywhere. The world outside had moved on. News vans packed up, reporters chased their next headline. But Daniel stepped into a quiet that felt heavier than the trial itself. His first stop wasn't home. It was the County Child Services office, where Eli was waiting. Eli ran into his father's arms without hesitation. Daniel held him like he'd never let go, his face buried in his son's hair. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the trial, not the years lost to betrayal, not even the sentence that would keep Monique behind bars for decades. All that mattered was that he'd survived, that Eli still had a father to come home to. Monique, meanwhile, was processed into the Christina Milton Crane unit in Gatesville, Texas, a cold, concrete reality that would be hers for the next 3.5 decades. The prison intake photo captured a woman stripped of everything. No jewelry, no soft lighting, no freedom. Her life was now counted in steel bars and head counts. Within her first year behind bars, she filed 2 appeals. Both were denied without hearing. No further legal challenges have been submitted. And maybe, deep down, she knows there's nothing left to argue. The duplex on Holt's Drive, the little house where the Carter family had once lived, didn't last much longer either. Foreclosed, boarded up, then bulldozed. Nothing remains but an empty lot, a patch of grass where a family's history turned into a cautionary tale. Tyrone Briggs, the delivery driver who'd once been part of Monique's secret life, disappeared from the public eye entirely. True to his immunity deal, he faced no charges. He moved to San Antonio, changed his name, and cut all ties with Austin. Law enforcement sources say he's never spoken publicly about the case again. Not to reporters, not to podcasts, not even to old friends. For Daniel, the path forward wasn't about revenge or even justice anymore. It was about rebuilding something safe and steady for Eli. He left Austin, relocating to a quiet suburb outside Dallas, closer to his sister's home. He found work with a logistics company, nothing flashy, but honest. The kind of job where no one knew his story unless he chose to tell it. And he rarely did. Neighbors describe him as polite, private, the kind of man who waves but doesn't linger. At school events, he's the dad in the back row, present, but never drawing attention. He's kept Eli out of the spotlight entirely, shielding him from the story that almost stole his childhood. Inside their home, there's one framed photo above Eli's bed. It's from a local fire department's open house. Daniel in a crisp navy shirt, kneeling beside Eli, both of them smiling. Under the frame, a small printed caption reads, "I lived. He still has me." For the detectives who ran the operation, the Carter case became a textbook example, not just of premeditated domestic crime, but of what happens when the danger comes from someone you trust most. No screaming fights, no police calls before, no public signs of trouble, just a plan, hidden in plain sight, moving forward while the target slept under the same roof. One officer put it best, "It's not the loud ones that get you. It's the quiet ones who look you in the eye and smile while they're setting the table." Daniel has made one public statement since the trial. It came through his attorney, in writing. "She tried to take everything from me. Not just the money. She tried to erase me from the world. And I almost let her. But I'm still here. My son still has a father. And that's the only victory I need." And with that, the file was closed. Monique Carter remains in state custody. Daniel Carter keeps living, quietly, deliberately, a survivor who refuses to let betrayal define the rest of his life. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply being alive to tell the story. In the years since that front door confrontation, the events of the Carter case have settled into the kind of eerie silence that follows a devastating storm. No more headlines. No more courtroom drama. Just the lingering shadow of what almost happened. But make no mistake, the impact didn't end with the sentencing. For Eli Carter, the truth will one day come in full. Right now, he's just a child, shielded from the ugliest details, told only that mommy made a bad choice and can't come home for a long time. But children grow. They find old news articles. They overhear conversations. And when that day comes, Daniel knows he'll have to tell him everything. He's rehearsed the words in his head, late at night, over dishes, during quiet drives. "Your mother didn't just want to leave me, son. She wanted me gone, forever." How do you tell a child that? How do you explain that the woman who gave him life also tried to take his father's? Inside the walls of Christina Milton Crane Unit, Monique keeps to herself. Prison records show no major disciplinary infractions. She works in laundry detail, attends occasional counseling sessions, and spends most of her free time reading. Other inmates say she rarely speaks of her crime, and when she does, she paints herself as a victim of circumstance, a woman who was pushed into bad decisions. But the paper trail, the recordings, the witness testimony, they all say otherwise. Her appeals are done. The legal doors have closed. And now, time is the only thing she has in abundance. As for Tyrone Briggs, the man who unknowingly became the pivot point in this entire case, his life is one long act of erasure. New city, new name, no public trace. Some call him a coward for testifying only after realizing he could be in legal trouble. Others say he's the reason Daniel Carter is alive. Both can be true. Law enforcement still uses the Carter case in training rooms, a lesson in how motive hides behind routine. No one saw the danger coming because Monique's life looked ordinary. A stay-at-home mom, a modest home, a husband who provided. No criminal record, no obvious instability. And yet, she carried in her mind a blueprint for murder so clean, she thought it would look like an act of fate. Detective Alvarez, who oversaw the undercover operation, still remembers the one sentence that stuck with her. "Let her see his face." I want to know how far she'll go. Those words, she says, turn the case from a rescue mission into something deeply personal. Daniel Carter doesn't talk about that day at the morgue much. How he lay there, perfectly still, feeling her eyes on him, listening for a gasp that never came, waiting for some hint of shock or sorrow, but hearing only the calm confirmation of a woman sealing her own fate. That's my husband. That moment, he says, was worse than anything else. Because in that cold, dim room, he saw the truth. There was no hesitation, no flicker of love, no memory strong enough to make her flinch. It wasn't just that she wanted him dead. It was that she had already let go of him completely. Now, in a small house in suburban Dallas, Daniel keeps his world small and deliberate. He cooks dinner. He makes school runs. He takes Eli to weekend soccer games. And every now and then, in the quiet moments, he feels that flicker of gratitude that he's still here to do it all. Because survival isn't just about breathing. It's about reclaiming every single day that someone tried to steal from you. And that, more than the trial, more than the sentence, more than the headlines, is the lasting legacy of this case. Not the betrayal, not the lie, but the fact that the man she tried to erase is still here, still standing, still raising his son, still living. Some stories leave you with questions. Others leave you with scars. The Carter case left both. We began with a husband working miles away, unaware that the home he fought to provide for was slowly turning into a stage for his own disappearance. We watched as ordinary days hit extraordinary betrayal, and as a casual flirtation twisted into something lethal. From the outside, Monique Carter's life looked like 1,000 others in East Austin. A quiet street, a modest duplex, a mother, a child, a husband working long shifts to keep the lights on. But behind closed doors, she was drawing lines on a map no one else could see, to a future that didn't include the man she'd vowed to love for better or worse. And every step she took brought her closer to the one truth Daniel Carter would have to face. That the woman sleeping beside him was already planning his funeral. Yet this is not just a story about betrayal. It's also a story about the thin, fragile thread that separates tragedy from survival. That thread had a name, Tyrone Briggs. If he'd stayed silent, if he'd told himself it was none of his business, if he'd decided to protect his own comfort over someone else's life, Daniel Carter's name might have been carved into stone by now. Instead, Tyrone made a call. One call. And from there, an extraordinary plan took shape, a plan that would flip the entire script on its author. Think about that morgue room. Think about the sheer audacity of it. A living man lying still under dim light, as the woman who was supposed to be his partner looked at him and saw a paycheck. No tears, no trembling hands, just a calm nod and 3 words. That's my husband. It's the kind of moment that sticks in your throat. The kind you wish was fiction. The law did its part. Monique will spend decades behind bars. She'll wake up every morning to the same cold walls, the same routine, the same reminder that freedom is a privilege she traded for greed. But justice doesn't erase the memory of betrayal. It doesn't return the years of trust that were stolen in silence. For Daniel, justice isn't a gavel. Justice is tucking his son in at night. Justice is showing up to school recitals. Justice is being alive to do the things she tried to take from him. And what about us? What do we take from this? Maybe it's a reminder that evil doesn't always come with a warning sign. Sometimes it looks like someone you know, someone you love, someone who swears they'd never hurt you until the day they do. Maybe it's knowing that in the smallest choices, a phone call, a confession, a decision to speak up, lives can be saved. Or maybe it's simply the truth that survival is the loudest revenge. Because Daniel Carter didn't just survive. He lived. And every single day he wakes up, he proves her wrong. So the next time you hear a story like this, remember, behind every headline is a person who chose to speak up. Behind every narrow escape is a thread, thin, fragile, but strong enough to pull someone back from the edge. In this case, that thread was stretched almost to the breaking point. But it held. And because it held, a little boy still has his father. A man still has his life. And a would-be killer has a lifetime to sit and think about what she's lost. This was the Carter case. A story of deceit, of greed, and of a comeback no one saw coming. Because sometimes, the ending isn't a eulogy. Sometimes, it's a knock at the door.